Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something that hits deep. The silence after a connection fades. When you stop talking to a woman, especially one who cared, something changes. Not just in her world, but in yours too. Because silence is not empty. It's full of thoughts, emotions, realizations, and transformation. When a woman stops hearing from someone she cares about, the initial silence hits her harder than most people realize. It's not just about unanswered messages or a lack of phone calls. It's about the emotional void that begins to form in the absence of communication. At first, she doesn't react with anger or resentment. Instead, she thinks, she reflects, she questions. Her mind starts replaying conversations, scanning memories, trying to pinpoint when things shifted. Was it something she said? Did she miss a sign? Could she have done something differently? This phase is filled with overthinking. Every quiet moment becomes a space for doubt. She may look back at your texts, trying to read between the lines. She may remember how your tone changed, how the energy in your conversations slowly began to fade. And even if she felt it coming, your silence still leaves her with a sting of disbelief. You see, when a woman cares, truly cares, she invests emotionally. So when that investment is met with distance, her mind tries to make sense of the imbalance. She doesn't immediately assume the worst. She gives you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you're busy. Maybe something happened. Maybe you need space. She tells herself it's temporary, but time changes things. And as hours turn to days, she begins to feel the weight of the silence. It becomes less about what happened, and more about why it happened. Her confusion grows deeper, but so does her awareness. She starts to notice patterns. How easily you could disconnect. How little explanation you gave. How you chose silence over honesty. That realization hurts, because it forces her to accept that maybe the connection meant more to her than it did to you. And that's a hard truth to swallow. Still, she reflects with grace. She holds on to the memories, not out of desperation, but because she wants to understand. She isn't begging for answers. She's searching for peace. And while some might mistake this reflection as weakness, it's far from that. It takes courage to face emotional uncertainty with patience. It takes strength to sit in silence and listen to your own thoughts, especially when those thoughts are filled with doubt and heartache. During this time, she also starts to evaluate her own behavior, not in a self-blaming way, but in an honest, self-aware manner. She asks herself if she gave too much, if she ignored red flags, if she lost sight of her own needs while trying to nurture the connection. This level of introspection isn't about guilt, it's about growth. She begins to understand the emotional weight she carried, and how it wasn't always balanced. She realizes that she can't force clarity from someone who chooses to disappear instead of communicate. There may be moments where she wants to reach out, where she almost does. She might type a message, reread it a few times, then delete it. Not because she doesn't care, but because she starts to understand that chasing silence only deepens the pain. She gives you the space you silently asked for, even though it hurts her to do so. And in that restraint, she starts to reclaim pieces of herself. She starts to hear her own voice again, louder than the silence you left behind. So while it may look like she's just waiting or wondering, what's really happening is internal work. She's navigating confusion, facing truths, and slowly separating emotional hope from emotional reality. And that process, although invisible to the outside world, is one of the most powerful stages of her healing. Because once she moves through this phase, she won't just understand what happened. She'll understand herself more deeply than ever before. After the confusion fades and the questions begin to quiet down, a woman enters the stage of emotional processing. This is where the real weight of silence settles in, not just mentally, but emotionally. It's no longer just about trying to understand what went wrong. It's about coming to terms with how it feels. And the truth is, it feels heavy. It feels like rejection, abandonment and loss, all wrapped into one silent experience. But even in that wait, there is movement. She begins to process her emotions, not all at once, but in waves, some days strong, some days subtle. The pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up in the moments where she thought about sharing something with you, only to remember she no longer can. It shows up in the silence that follows laughter, in the stillness of the night when thoughts feel the loudest. She might cry, not because she's weak, but because she's human. Those tears don't make her fragile. They cleanse her. They create space for clarity, for release, for truth. She begins to acknowledge her hurt without pushing it away. She allows herself to feel it fully, not just the sadness, but the disappointment, the frustration, even the anger. This isn't about blaming you or tearing herself down. It's about giving herself permission to feel without apology, because pretending she's okay would only delay the healing. Real strength lies in facing emotions head on, and that's exactly what she starts to do. As she processes everything, she revisits moments, not to live in the past, but to make peace with it. She remembers the times she felt seen, heard, and appreciated by you. Then she remembers the shift, how slowly the warmth faded, how silence replaced connection. These memories are painful, but necessary. She has to confront the good and the bad, to truly move through it. It's not about erasing what was shared, but about detaching from what's no longer real. She also begins to separate your silence from her worth. That's one of the hardest parts, because in the beginning, it's easy to feel like your absence means she wasn't enough. But as she sits with those emotions longer, she realizes that your silence speaks more about you than it does about her. And while that truth doesn't erase the pain, it starts to lighten it. She recognizes that someone else's decision to disconnect isn't a reflection of her value. That realization doesn't come overnight, but when it does, it's powerful. In this stage, her emotional processing also leads her to gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for the lessons within it. She sees the strength she's developing, the awareness she's gaining, the depth she's discovering within herself. There's something incredibly transformative about facing heartbreak without running from it. She learns what she truly needs in a connection. She sees where she gave too much of herself, where she stayed silent to keep the peace, where she loved with more patience than she received in return. Through this emotional journey, she begins to redefine what love should feel like. She no longer clings to the memory of what could have been. Instead, she leans into what she deserves going forward. The sadness doesn't disappear completely, but it no longer controls her. She's not waiting for closure anymore. She's giving it to herself piece by piece, through honest reflection and emotional acceptance. This phase may not look like progress from the outside, but inside she is doing the most important work of all, healing. She's letting go of the illusion and embracing the reality. And in doing so, she's slowly finding peace, not because you gave it to her, but because she gave it to herself. After sitting in the silence, after feeling the sting of emotional weight and giving herself permission to feel, a woman begins to shift. She moves into the quiet, powerful phase of self-reclamation. This is where something remarkable happens, not overnight, and not without effort, but slowly and intentionally. She starts to take her power back. The attention she once gave freely to someone else, she now redirects inward. Her thoughts, her energy, her love. She stops giving them to the void left behind, and starts giving them back to herself. She begins to recognize the space that's opened up in her life, not as a loss, but as an opportunity. Where there was once distraction or uncertainty, there is now room to breathe. She doesn't rush to fill it. Instead, she listens to her needs, to her wants, to the parts of herself that may have gone quiet while trying to keep a connection alive. She realizes how much she had bent, compromised, waited, or hoped. And now she stops doing all of that, not because she's bitter, but because she's awake. She may start with small things. Maybe it's taking care of her body, changing a routine, revisiting passions she put aside. Maybe it's spending more time alone, not out of loneliness, but out of choice. She starts to enjoy her own company again. She laughs without needing someone beside her to validate the moment. She fills her space with what feels like her, not what was left behind by someone else. There's a quiet pride that grows in her, one that says, I am mine again. She stops checking for messages that aren't coming. She stops looking for closure and silence. The unanswered questions start to matter less. What matters more is how she feels when she wakes up in the morning, how she speaks to herself, how she honors her own heart. This is not about forgetting the past. It's about no longer being ruled by it. She lets go of the version of herself that waited. She lets go of the part that wondered if she was too much or not enough. She claims the truth that her worth isn't tied to who chooses her or who doesn't. There's a shift in her energy. People might notice it. She smiles differently, moves with intention, sets boundaries where she once gave in. She's not trying to prove anything to anyone, not even to herself. She's simply returning to her own center. And from that place, everything changes. She no longer tolerates what drains her. She no longer entertains half efforts or vague intentions. She makes it clear, through her choices and her silence, that her time, her love, and her presence are valuable. This process doesn't erase the pain that came before it, but it transforms it. What once broke her becomes the very thing that rebuilds her. She looks in the mirror and sees someone who walked through emotional fire and didn't burn. Someone who stopped chasing love and started becoming it. She realizes that while someone else's silence may have triggered this journey, it's her own voice that's guiding her out of it. There's nothing louder than a woman who reclaims herself. Not with noise, not with anger, but with quiet confidence. She doesn't need revenge, or validation, or explanations. She just needs her peace, her purpose, and her own presence. And as she stands there, whole, healing, and honest, she understands one thing deeply. She was never truly lost. She had just forgotten, for a moment, how powerful it is to choose yourself. Now she remembers, and she's not going back. Silence, once a painful reminder of absence, slowly becomes something entirely different in a woman's journey. After moving through confusion, emotional release, and reclaiming parts of herself, she finds herself no longer intimidated by the quiet. In fact, she begins to find strength in it. Where silence once echoed with questions and what-ifs, it now holds space for clarity, control, and calm. She doesn't run from the stillness anymore. She embraces it. This silence is no longer about the absence of someone else's words. It's about the presence of her own inner voice. There's something powerful about realizing you don't need constant validation or conversation to feel whole. She starts to trust herself more. Her decisions come from intuition, rather than insecurity. She becomes comfortable with the idea that not everyone will explain their disappearance. Not everyone will apologize. And not everyone deserves to come back. She stops arguing with reality. She no longer needs to chase after explanations. Silence, once so loud and unsettling, now becomes her boundary. She realizes that choosing not to respond is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's choosing peace over pointless confrontation. It's refusing to beg for what should be freely given. Effort, communication, respect. In this new space of silence, she isn't shutting down. She's simply tuning into herself. It is in this quiet that she rebuilds. Not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily. Her energy is no longer wasted on proving her worth to someone who walked away. She's focused now on her healing, on her growth, on her joy. There's something sacred about the way she turns inward, about how she begins to protect her energy, as if it were the most precious thing she owns. Because now she understands that it is. When someone tries to return, breaking the very silence they created, they often find her changed. Not cold, not cruel, but resolved. The woman who once waited by her phone is gone. In her place stands someone who learned to sit with discomfort and transform it into wisdom. She doesn't rush to respond. She doesn't entertain half-hearted apologies or vague intentions. She listens to what's not being said as much as what is. and often she chooses not to reply at all, because silence has taught her that not every question deserves an answer, and not every person deserves a second chance. There's resilience in her stillness. It shows in the way she carries herself, in how she now speaks less and observes more. Her silence is no longer passive, it's purposeful. She uses it to pause before reacting, to measure what adds value, and what simply takes up space. She no longer allows her emotions to be dictated by someone else's inconsistency. The strength she's found in silence has become her shield and her compass. People may misunderstand her quiet. They might think she's distant, guarded, or hard to reach. But the truth is, she's just protecting her peace. After everything she's been through, after feeling abandoned and questioning her worth, she's finally learned that silence can be the loudest declaration of self-love. It's not that she doesn't care anymore. It's that she cares deeply, but not carelessly. This strength wasn't built overnight. It was earned through heartbreak, through tears, through long nights of wondering why. But now that she has it, she won't let it go. She doesn't need to explain herself to be understood. She doesn't need to speak to be heard. Her silence says it all. I've been through the storm, and I made it out stronger, and I don't need noise to prove it. Personal growth after emotional disconnection is rarely obvious at first. It doesn't arrive with loud declarations or immediate transformations. Instead, it unfolds gradually, often quietly, as a woman begins to rebuild herself from within. After she has reflected, grieved, processed, and reclaimed her sense of identity, something inside her begins to shift. She doesn't just move on, she evolves, not to prove a point to anyone else, but to align more closely with the woman she's always had the potential to be. She begins to notice changes in how she thinks, how she responds, and how she prioritizes herself. There is no sudden moment where everything becomes clear, but rather a series of small awakenings. She stops needing closure from others, and starts giving it to herself. She realizes that she no longer seeks validation where it isn't freely offered. The energy she once spent trying to hold on is now redirected toward building something better within her career, her passions, her friendships, and most importantly, her inner peace. There's a new awareness in her. She begins to understand the importance of boundaries, something she may have struggled with before. What she once tolerated now feels unacceptable. What she once stayed silent about, she now feels confident addressing. She doesn't shrink herself to avoid conflict or make others comfortable. She recognizes that growth requires discomfort, and she no longer fears it. The pain she experienced has become her teacher, not her identity. She might take time to reflect on what she truly values in relationships, what matters, what no longer serves her, and what she will no longer compromise. She realizes that love is not about chasing, fixing, or proving. It's about mutual respect, communication, and effort. And if those are not present, she's okay with walking away, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. Her routines change, even subtly. She invests time in the things that feed her soul, whether it's therapy, meditation, physical health, or creative expression. She begins to build habits that reinforce her well-being. She stops living on autopilot and starts living intentionally. She surrounds herself with people who uplift rather than drain, who mirror her growth rather than resist it. This personal development is not just emotional, it's mental and spiritual. She becomes more self-aware, more emotionally intelligent. She begins to catch herself in old thought patterns and rewrites them. She silences her inner critic and replaces it with compassion. Instead of questioning her worth based on someone else's actions, she affirms it daily. She no longer waits for someone else to choose her. She chooses herself over and over again. She also gains the strength to forgive, not just others, but herself. She forgives herself for the times she stayed too long, for the words she didn't say, for the love she gave that wasn't returned. She no longer holds shame over being vulnerable. Instead, she sees that as one of her greatest strengths. Vulnerability didn't break her. It revealed her depth. And now that she's emerged from the silence stronger, she honors that depth. Her glow changes. It's no longer tied to who notices her, or who responds to her, or who decides to come back. Her glow comes from within, from the freedom of no longer needing anything outside of herself to feel whole. That is growth. And that growth, rooted in self-awareness, self-love, and self-respect, becomes unshakable. She didn't just survive the silence, she grew in it. And now she's not who she was before. She's better. She's wiser. She's finally her own. Moving on is not a single moment. It is not defined by a dramatic goodbye, a deleted number, or a symbolic gesture. Moving on is a process, a quiet, often invisible transition, where a woman begins to free herself from the emotional grip of someone who once held space in her heart. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. Some days it looks like peace, other days like doubt. But with every passing moment, she steps farther away from what hurt her, and closer to what heals her. At first it still lingers. Memories, habits, thoughts. She might still think about what was. But the difference is, it no longer consumes her. The ache doesn't sting the way it used to. She can revisit a memory, and not feel stuck in it. Her mind stops racing with questions. The why no longer holds her hostage. She's made peace with not knowing everything. She understands now that clarity doesn't always come with answers, but with acceptance. There's no longer a need to monitor, to check in, or to leave the door cracked open for the possibility of return. She stops hoping for closure from the same place that created the wound. She understands that moving on is a choice she has to make for herself, and that waiting for someone else to make it easier will only keep her trapped. So she begins to release, not with anger, but with grace. She lets go of the fantasy, the potential, the idea of what could have been, and in doing so she makes room for what can be. She finds herself enjoying life again, not as a distraction, but as a genuine experience. The laughter becomes real. The sleep becomes deeper. The moments with friends, with herself, with new people, feel lighter. She no longer compares everyone to the one who left. She stops viewing new possibilities through the lens of old pain. Her heart begins to trust again, not blindly, but bravely. Because even though she was hurt, she knows she's capable of love, and even more capable of surviving without it. Moving on doesn't mean she forgets. It means she remembers without aching. It means she can hear their name and not flinch. It means she can look back without wanting to go back. She sees the experience not as wasted time, but as something that taught her what she needed to know about herself, about boundaries, about what she deserves, and what she refuses to tolerate again. The pain had purpose, and now she carries the wisdom, not the wound. Her focus shifts. What once revolved around someone else's presence or absence now centers around her own growth. She sets new goals. She dreams bigger. She shows up for herself in ways she once hoped someone else would. That's the magic of moving on. It's not just about walking away from someone else. It's about walking toward the version of yourself that you almost forgot existed. Even when reminders surface, she's no longer derailed. She acknowledges them and keeps moving forward. Her strength isn't loud or forceful. It's steady. She doesn't need to post about her healing. She lives it. She breathes it. And people begin to notice. Not because she said she moved on, but because she did. Her energy is different. Her boundaries are clearer. Her standards are higher. And her heart, though once broken, beats with a rhythm of resilience and quiet pride. She no longer seeks validation in being remembered. She finds comfort in having released what was never truly meant to stay. She understands that letting go doesn't mean losing. It means choosing herself. Moving on isn't a destination. It's a daily decision. And each day she makes it with more ease, more strength, and more freedom than ever before.